Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll talk about prison awaiting hostile bloggers, police goofing another raid, and the nanny state putting books out of reach. All that and more on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to another episode of Free Minds TV. It's episode 110. With you as always is Toby.
And Nick.
We have a ton going on today. We are going to be talking about some more serious news with the air raids going on out of Karzai, as well as getting into some nanny state and even a man in Montreal being fined for feeding a squirrel. But first, we're going to be sticking to home a little bit. Some disturbing legislation coming out of Washington where prison could be awaiting hostile bloggers. Now, this legislation hasn't been gone through yet. Right now, it's in the House Judiciary Committee, but it could be some really disturbing news in the future for anyone who might be posting on websites, texting people, or talking on the phone. The proposed congressional legislation would demand up to 2 years in prison for those whose electronic speech is meant to coerce, intimidate, harass, or cause substantial emotional distress to a person. The H.R. 1966 is proposed by Linda Shantes of Los Angeles and supported by 14 co-sponsors.
This sounds pretty vague.
Well,
I mean, it seems like that could apply to any kind of mean or nasty statement you make to somebody on a message board.
Well,
or
it could
over
be
the phone.
anything that's even meant just simply coerce someone. You could be facing up to 2 years in prison for this. This would be, I mean, it's some pretty serious stuff. And this would go through including email, instant messaging, blogs, websites, telephones, and even text messages. Now, the reason for this legislation is to try to cut back on cyberbullying because, you know, there's been some recent cases coming out where people on MySpace and such are, well, people are making fun of them or sending them mean text messages. And there was even one case where someone wound up killing themselves over it, which is tragic. It is tragic. But where is the freedom of speech if you're threatening people with jail time if they're using coercive language on the telephone, on the internet, or through text messaging services? It seems like some pretty nasty legislation. Yeah, it's not nice to make fun of people, but should you go to prison for it?
I would say no. I mean, you're not expected not to say mean things to people in real life. Now, there are some limited laws about criminal threatening, but you can be as mean as you want.
Those are already on the books. Criminal threatening
Right.
is already there, and harassing someone, that's a law that's already on the books. So if you're harassing someone, well, you can get arrested for that. They already have those laws. This, which would be called the Megan Muir Cyberbullying Prevention Act, would be going much, much further. It would be going after any language that could be deemed as coercive, any language that might be deemed to intimidate someone. Could get you in jail for 2 years.
Right, and I mean, it's pretty common to see nasty messages online. If you leave comments on a YouTube video, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you might be able to scroll down in the comments and see some pretty nasty messages directed at other posters. But that shouldn't be a crime. It might be poor etiquette, it might be rude, but why should that be illegal in a country where supposedly you have the freedom to speak your mind?
Right. I guess you only have the freedom to speak your mind if other people are either agreeing with it or if it's nice. I mean, but that's not what the First Amendment is for. The First Amendment is to protect the nasty speech, the speech people don't want to hear, whether it be something that's political or something that, well, is downright nasty and someone wants to post a nasty blog. As long as it's not actually harassing someone, which there's already a law in the book about that, or criminal threatening, which we already have a law in the book about. I don't know why we need another one of these laws to be, well, putting people in jail, which our prisons are already overflowing, putting even more people behind bars because, well, they want to text someone something that they might not like on their cell phone or might intimidate them on a cell phone. It just seems like micromanaging people's lives.
Well, that is exactly what it is. But I think, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of free speech advocates who are somewhat asleep on this. It's a relatively new Congress, a new administration. And some people are assuming that because it's a Democratic administration, it's a Democratic Congress, suddenly free speech isn't something you have to worry about anymore. But the fact of the matter is, if this legislation is passed into law, it's going to happen on a Democratic watch. It doesn't matter what party is in control in Washington, you constantly have to be on guard because regardless of the party, they're eroding the Bill of Rights one piece of legislation at a time.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I think, would be going after. It's meant to prevent cyberbullying, which is usually going on among teens and preteens, the youngsters out there who have these pieces of technology. And
would they be tried as an adult?
Well, I don't know. And then if that's the question. Are you going to be throwing these kids in juvie? I mean, and what about real bullying?
Isn't this a federal crime if this
This is a federal crime if this
Federal
passed.
juvie?
Federal
Federal
juvie?
juvie?
I don't know how that would work out. I mean, what do we do when a kid is bullying someone else on the playground? I mean, when it's in person, well, they'd probably be sent to a timeout and they'd have to talk to the principal. But we're not threatening them with prison. Yet if they go and do it on a computer, which is even more detached, they're going to face a much worse crime?
Yeah, I mean, when you're actually bullying someone on the playground, sometimes that implies that the kid's beating someone up or something, but cyberbullying...
No, we're just talking about saying mean things.
Or typing them.
Kids say, talking on the phone or typing mean things or text messaging mean things. Kids say mean things. Should they go to prison for it? I say no. Anyways, we have to move on. If you have comments on that, if you feel differently, fmtv@freemindstv.com, or you can log on to our website, freemindstv.com, and leave us your comments there. But we've got to move on to some news around the world and stuff that's happening in Iran, where you have a story, Nick, about a journalist who's finally been freed.
Right, and as many problems as we're starting to have here in the United States with free speech, in Iran it's quite a bit worse. And we're going to be talking about a U.S. journalist who's been freed by Iran after 4 months in jail and has been reunited with their parents. Reza Sabiri and his wife Akiko were parents of U.S.-Iranian journalist Roxana Sabiri, and they reunited with her at Evin Prison in Tehran on Monday. And she's been in jail in Iran basically on charges of spying for the United States. She originally had an 8-year jail sentence, which was commuted last month to a 2-year suspended sentence. So she's a dual Iranian U.S. citizen. She's not, completely, it's not just like she was a U.S. citizen traveling. She has ties to Iran. There's not really very good evidence that she was spying. What she was doing was saying things that were unpopular in Iran, maybe reporting on things that the Iranian government did not want to get out. So it's good news that she's been freed. It is a victory for free speech in a part of the world that isn't very free. And she is going to be allowed to leave Iran, come back to the United States, which I would do, because assuming she remains in Iran, they could reinstate that suspended sentence pretty much any time they wanted to.
Well, that's some good news that they've at least freed her from, I'm sure, is not a nice jail cell there. Meanwhile, here in the United States, right where we're recording the show from in Keene, New Hampshire, Sam Dodson is still behind bars for attempting to film outside a public courtroom in the lobby, and right now he's behind bars. I think he's on his 5th week now, maybe 6th week behind bars on a hunger strike for refusing to give his full legal name. And if people want more information on that, we covered it in depth on this week's episode of Free Minds Radio, who actually called us from prison. So if you want to get the full story on that, log on to freemindstv.com and click on the radio archives. But is there anything more to this story, or it's just some good, happy news for once reporting on Free Minds TV?
It's some good, happy news in this particular case. I did want to use it to point out Sam's case and other cases that have taken place around the country where journalists have been sent to jail for not revealing their sources, for simply trying to film somewhere like a public court lobby like Sam was trying to do. So while we supposedly have a right to a freedom of the press here in the United States, we have our own problems. And it sounds outrageous, something that could never happen in America, to have a journalist just accused of spying and sent to jail for, she was originally sentenced to 8 years in prison, but it's not that far out of the realm of possibility. And I just think that people should keep that in mind when they're watching in the United States, complaining about how bad and oppressive the government in Iran is. Certainly, it's not as good of a place to be a journalist. We are better off here in the United States, but how much better off are we?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen several journalists arrested right here where we're reporting from, members of the Free State Project and other locals who are simply trying to record the public proceedings in court or outside in the lobby and being arrested for it. So, I mean, well, they're strict in Iran. We're definitely not perfect over here. I mean, reporters still behind bars for trying to report on public events. Anyways, we do have to move on. I've got a story here about yet another police goof in a raid. Well, this happened to Andrew Leonard, who was watching television with his wife not long after returning from Ash Wednesday services, when police burst through his front door in his North Baltimore home. He was handcuffed, plunked in a chair, and told to keep quiet as officers rifled through his house and interrogated him for 15 minutes about a drug dealer he knew nothing about. After they let him go, they did not clean up his $1,200 door that they had busted in, didn't even take it off the hinges and take it down. He had to do that. He had to take it out back and put it behind his house while he waited for the city, which is responsible for bulk trash removal, to come pick it up. He made several calls to them to come pick it up. He made several calls to the city to try to get them to pay for the damages. Both calls were refused. He was told that they weren't going to be picking it up quite yet, and they definitely weren't going to be paying for any of his damages. Well, sounds like another police raid gone bad. We've heard this story several times. But a few weeks later, somebody did show up for his door. It was the city inspector to issue tickets for garbage left in his backyard. They issued him a $50 fine for failing to remove the door, which is the city's responsibility to remove. Now, how asinine is this? You're sitting at home watching television, the cops bust down your door, tear apart your apartment, don't clean it up, don't pay for the $1,200 worth of damages, and then fine you for having a broken door. This is happening right here in America, and it's not an isolated case. Luckily, nobody died in this raid, but we've reported on many stories where people are killed, animals are killed, when police do these no-knock raids, bust down the door, or even maybe the right door of a house, and kill innocent people inside. A 2006 Cato Institute study found that hundreds of these raids go on every year. With these no-knock raids, police bust down the door, and they simply have the wrong address. Now, police are claiming, you say, well, this doesn't make sense. How could this really go on? I mean, how can the police bust the wrong door and then fine you for it? Well, the police have an excuse, pass the buck. It looks like on the warrant, whoever issued the warrant, the judge or whatnot, had actually written down the wrong address. So it's not their fault they knocked down the wrong door. They're just doing their jobs. Well, the good news out of this, if you call it good news, I'd call it yet another travesty among the war on drugs. They did apprehend the suspect. 35-year-old David Pfizer was arrested on March 21st. And was charged with possession of drugs and attempted distribution. So, they caught the bad guy. So what if this guy had to have his whole life rifled through and had to pay $1,200 plus a fine for the city not removing his door? We're going after bad guys who are trying to deal drugs. Well, this is just yet another reason why we need to end the senseless war on drugs. It's not doing anything to protect people, and it's definitely not benefiting society. We have more people hooked on drugs than we ever would have if we did not start this needless war that's doing nothing to help people.
Right, it's doing nothing to help people, but there are unintended consequences like this botched raid and like the many others that are taking place across the U.S. And a lot of these raids don't end with a broken door. In a way, this guy was fortunate. He kept his life, which isn't much consolation when you consider the fact that he did have his place gone through. It cost him a lot of money and aggravation, and he has a good reason to be ticked off, but they can go a lot worse than this.
Yeah, and they don't even announce themselves. These are no-knock raids that are happening hundreds of times a day throughout the United States, where police are just kicking down a door without even announcing themselves. So this is why a lot of people die. Well, you have an intruder kick down your door. What if you go and try to defend yourself? Well, you're going to get shot. So yet another reason to end the senseless war on drugs. It's not doing anything but benefiting the cops and the drug dealers. Anyways, we do got to move on. We can't do anything about this story, unfortunately. But one thing you might be able to do is let the reps in Washington know that you're real pissed off at them for all the bad stuff they do. And we try to allow viewers to do that each week with the Downsizer Dispatch. What's on tap this week, Nick?
Well, this week the Downsizer Dispatch is talking about how your state in a large extent belongs to the feds. For the first time ever, federal aid now funds the majority of state government spending. So over half of what the state governments are spending in total is actually funded by the feds. Now, some people might be saying, well, yeah, but what does it matter whether the federal government pays for it, whether the state government pays for it? Well, funding usually goes along with control. So the feds will mandate a program, then they'll fund it so no one complains. But the fact of the matter is your state government is really just a pawn of the federal government at this point. Most of what they do is mandated by the federal government, and you really don't have any say. If you're going to your state capital to try to get, say, drug laws repealed, or you want a drinking age at 18 or 19 instead of 21, well, you're going to run up against the issue of either federal mandates or federal funding, and that's not the way it was intended when the U.S. was founded. There's a 10th Amendment that limits the federal government to 20 specific functions that are listed in the Constitution, and they overstep that by quite a bit. So if you think you and other people in your state should be able to govern yourselves without very much interference from the federal government, go to downsizedc.org, and you can try to encourage your elected officials in Washington to either vote for the Enumerated Powers Act, which would at least make the federal government cite what part of the Constitution justifies their legislation, which they really can't do since most of it's unconstitutional, or they have to cite the same thing over and over again. Or you can go to downsizedc.org's Cut Spending campaign, which would also help reduce the amount of state spending that's dictated by the feds, because the less the feds spend, the less they have to hand to the states with mandates attached.
Sounds good. If people want to get involved, downsizedc.org is the place to go. Let those dirty scumbags in Washington know what's up. Anyways, we've got to move on. I'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website, freemindstv.com. From there, what we're doing right now is we're trying to raise some funds. We're going to PorkFest 2009. It is June the 25th. The first day of PorkFest, we will be filming up there, and we would like to do it live. But if we're going to do it live, we need a $165 piece of equipment. We already have a few people who have contributed, but you can be among them and help us go live. If you're not maybe traveling to New Hampshire for part of PorkFest 2009 as a part of the Free State Project's annual camping trip, well, maybe you want to watch some of the happenings on the computer. Well, you can do that if you log on to freemindstv.com and click on the chip in button. Give us some funds. Help us fund this so that we can go live. It would be really nice. I think it would be really cool if people from around the world could watch what's going on in New Hampshire during the Liberty Movement. Anyways, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, raids in Karzai as well as feeding squirrels illegally. All that and more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Dave Ridley here from RidleyReport.com. Just wanted to urge Monadnock area viewers, please take Free Minds TV in moderation. You don't want your head to get loose and go floating around. Also, when you get to the courthouse for jury duty, please don't let the judge trick you. Don't ruin people's lives without good cause. You have the right and the duty to acquit any accused lawbreaker if you dislike the law.
Log on to freemindstv.com for archives of the show, the Free Minds Radio podcasts, show content and the forum, ways to donate, the members section, contact info, and a whole lot more, all at freemindstv.com.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
This is Glenn Jacobs, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to the show. It's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, log on to our website, freemindstv.com. From there, there's not only the TV archives, the radio show archives, but we also have a new blog up. If you want to check out some of the latest news, check it out. There should be stuff on there all the time, new stuff. There's a poll up and all sorts of new features. It's a brand new website, always going through changes. Give us your feedback, freemindstv.com. All right, we are going to be talking about the nanny state putting books out of reach as well as feeding squirrels. But first, you've got something a little bit more serious for us, Nick.
Yep, and this one has to do with how air raids in Afghanistan have some government officials there pretty angry. Afghan President Hamid Karzai says he's very serious about a demand for foreign forces in Afghanistan to halt air raids, even though it was rebuffed by a top U.S. security official, a spokesman said on Monday. Afghans are furious about the bombing of 2 villages in western Farah province during a drawn-out battle last week when homes full of civilians were hit. Karzai, who went on U.S. television to demand an end to all air attacks, has put the death toll at up to 130 people. If his figure is confirmed, it would be the biggest such case of Western forces killing civilians since they invaded in 2001. His plea was rejected by White House National Security Advisor James Jones, who said the United States could not be expected to, quote, fight with one hand tied behind its back. We demand a complete end to the bombardment of our villages, and we are very serious about it, said presidential spokesman C. Mac Harawi when asked about Jones's comments. They're like a double-edged weapon in which the international community is hurting itself and also the Afghan people, he added, talking about the air raids. So obviously, people in Afghanistan are pretty angry about these air raids, which are killing, in some cases, up to over 100 civilians at once. Now, not all of the people in the air raid that were killed in that air raid were necessarily civilians. It's possible there were some bad guys in there too, but most of the reports are indicating that most of the people killed there were civilians.
Well, that's the thing. How many women and children and innocent people is it okay to kill in order to go after a few suspected bad guys. And how is this making the United States image look in the world when we're blowing up innocent people? I mean,
well, especially in those places. I mean, whether it was intended or not, or whether it was a result of gross negligence or not, if you're one of the people who lost a family member in that particular Afghan village, do you really care?
Right. I mean, what if China came over here to free us from our oppressive government, for example, and they decided that in order to go after the governmental bad guys or other people who they deem as bad, they had to blow up some towns, some villages, some cities, and they blew up your parents' house and they killed your family. Would you become a freedom fighter or an insurgent? Because I'm going to tell you this right now, I would. So can you blame people who are becoming terrorists after we're blowing up their friends and family members and hating the United States? Because if China came over here to free us from our hostile and oppressive government and they killed my family members in the process, I mean, even if they just came over here, I'd be taking up arms against them. But I mean, if they actually were killing my friends, my family members, well, you better bet that I would have a grudge against them and I would want to be called a so-called terrorist and go after them. I mean, it's only, A plus B equals C. 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's simple. I don't know how people get beyond the fact that if we just blow them all up, if we just kill them all, Nick, we'll all be safe. When in fact, what we're doing is just making more terrorists.
Right, and it's blowback. It's what happens when you go to war with a country. It's one of the reasons that war should be avoided as much as is possible. Because when you do go to war, you create new enemies. Now it's possible to win militarily, but you create new threats for the future when you go to war and civilians die as a result and resentments are created. War is a waste of human effort, and it's best to be avoided at every possible turn.
And for all you peace-loving hippies out there, this is going on under the Obama administration. No more blaming Bush for this. When you're looking at your poll numbers, when that Zogby phone call rings and asks, do you support Obama and what he's doing? Well, he's doing the same stuff Bush did. Anyways, we do have to move on. Let's pick on the nanny state a little bit because, we got to do it in every episode. They're so ridiculous with some of the things they do. It's just easy to laugh at. This coming out of the UK where libraries, or one library in particular, is putting books out of reach. The Oxford University have banned stepladders from its world-famous Bodleian Library. The books, which are on the top shelf, are over 400 years old. Now, to me, when I first read the headline of this story and read into it a little bit, I said, well, they're taking away the stepladders because, well, their books are 400 years old, and, well, maybe they want to protect them. No, that's not what they're doing. The books are fine to read. Yes, they're 400 years old, and they have to stay on the top shelf because that's their historical location. That's why the University of Oxford would like to keep them on the top shelf, because that's their historical location. It's not because they might get damaged being used that they're taking over the stepladders. Yes, it's for health and safety reasons. Because what if someone slips on the stepladder and falls down and hurts their ankle or something? Can't have people climbing up 2 steps to get a book. That would be too dangerous. So the world-famous library, which has people coming from as far around us, well, any part of the world, people are coming to this library to use some of these old text. Well, those books just simply won't be available because, well, it's your safety. You wouldn't want to hurt yourself.
So they're not moving them down to the second or third
That's the historical location. That's the historical location. They need to stay on the top shelf. But you simply can't get them because that would be too dangerous. You might have to walk up 2 feet to the fall. I mean, this coming after the UK banned firefighters from using stepladders to change batteries on smoke alarms. They have to use a pole now. Slope. I mean, what's next, people?
Ladder control.
Ladder control. Them ladders. The #1 threat to people. It's just ridiculous. Nanny state, you guys are ridiculous. I mean, we've got it over here as well, but I mean, they paint themselves with a big old target so we can pick on them once a week for one ridiculous thing they do. I mean, I guess it's humorous to talk about, but I mean,
some people
reality,
actually can't reach those books now.
It's really sad.
There's probably some of those books, I'm assuming if they were printed 400 years ago, some of those might be the only remaining copy of whatever they're dealing with. So you are actually talking about taking knowledge and putting it out of reach for people who are probably academics, because I can't imagine people are going to that university who just to peruse the books. I mean, they're probably people
to look
who are,
at them. They look nice way up there on that
scholars.
top shelf. Up on that top shelf, they look nice. So we'll just keep them there. Anyways, it's funny. We do have to move on though. I've got one more story I want to get to before we have to leave, and it comes from Montreal. We haven't picked on Canada in a while, I believe. So let's do it. This one having to do with feeding squirrels. Yes, we all know that it's probably not a good idea to feed any wild animals, as it will make them come back for more, and whether that's bad for the animals because they don't go out and find their own food, and when the people leave they might starve to death, or because, well, it creates vermin, and vermin come around. If you're constantly feeding them, we're going to get squirrels running around looking for food everywhere. We wouldn't want that. So probably not the best idea to feed a squirrel, but should people be fined for it? And should there be a bureaucrat whose job is to go around the park to make sure that no one's feeding the squirrels? Well, apparently there is in Canada, and Bruce Kurt was the victim, well, I guess he was the offender, when he decided to feed a squirrel a single peanut. He says the squirrel came down from the tree and he put a peanut out and the squirrel took it. Well, luckily the bureaucrat was there to slap him with a $40 fine. He slapped the $40 fine on the man and told him that he had, I think, a couple months to pay. Well, the fine was never paid. It was risen to $450, and he finally was dragged into court about it. The judge actually dropped it back down to $50, and that's Canadian dollars too. So yeah, that's some good news that he wasn't fined
like
the
40 American dollars.
Full $455. But I mean, should we really have a bureaucrat whose job it is to make sure people don't feed the squirrels? Is this what tax dollar money is supposed to go towards, really? To make sure people aren't feeding the squirrels in a public park?
Apparently in Montreal it is. And I mean, that's something you would probably find in most U.S. cities.
I fed the ducks once when there was a sign that said, "Don't feed the ducks." And a police officer walked up to me and said, "Don't feed the ducks." And I said, "Okay." Well, that was all that happened. I did get a ticket. Bruce Kurt says he was upset that he wasn't given that same warning. He was just slapped with a fine, and he's a little bit peeved about it. He decided to write a song about it, actually, because, well, he can't really do much else. I mean, they got him by the cojones here. They did let him off the hook with $405 of it, so I guess he felt a little bit grateful. But, you know, he was still scorned because he was just trying to do a nice thing for a squirrel, he said. Anyways, we're out of time. That's it. If you have a different opinion, we'd love to hear it. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email address. freemindstv.com is the website. From there, there's all the old archives of the show, ways to help the show, and help get us live at PorcFest. We'd really appreciate it. We need about $100 more or so within the next few weeks if people want to see us live on June the 25th. Live from PorcFest 2009. Anyways, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We're going to actually leave you with Bruce Kurt's song about squirrels and his incident when he got caught feeding a squirrel a peanut. Have a good night.
Walked out one morning, didn't hear a sound. Found some peanuts lying on the ground. Tossed to a squirrel coming down from a tree. Puzzled and wondering, who could this be? A cop in his car, saying it's too late, writing out a ticket for Squirrel Gate. I asked for a warning, he simply refused. Went to contest it, now it's big news. Waiting on a summons that was never to appear. The cop and the bailiff were out for a beer. My ticket and problems were to escalate, all on account of Squirrel Gate.